All right, we will call the regular meeting of the Caroline County Planning Commission for December the 20th, 2024 to order. I'll invite everybody to join me.
19th.
Did I say 20th?
Yes, sir.
That's tomorrow. Okay, we can come back tomorrow. No, for the 19th of December. I would invite everybody to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. By way of introduction, to my far left, we have Mr. Steve Rollins of the Mattaponi District. To my immediate left is Dr. Carol Horton, representing Port Royal. I'm Bob Schwartz, representing Bowling Green. I'm the chairman. To my right is Mr. J.D. Young and our vice chair, representing Reedy Church. Mr. George Weaver, representing Madison, is not with us tonight. And on the far right is Mr. Richard Williams, representing Western Caroline. Commissioners, have you had a chance to review the minutes from our November meeting? And if so, are there any additions or corrections? Hearing no additions or corrections, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we accept the minutes for November 21st, 2024, accepted as presented to us.
And I would second that.
Motion by Mr. Young, seconded by Mr. Williams. Any further discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The minutes are approved as presented. Let's see. Mr. Hughes, would you read or someone read the protocol for the public hearing, since we do have to at least put on record we've had a public hearing? It's Mr. Pennington's fault.
I'll ad lib. So public hearings are intended to allow the public an opportunity to speak and present their views on cases that are before you tonight. Speakers have 3 minutes to present their views. This is not a back and forth, excuse me, debate with the commission, but is an opportunity for citizens to ask questions and present their views. The commission, if they wish to ask staff to address any questions, they may do so going forward.
All right, thank you, sir. Before we get into the meeting and to the general public and to our staff that are present and to the staff that are not present, I would like to just say thank you for everything y'all have done for the year. We wish y'all the very best and happiest of the holidays.
Mr. Chair, before you
Yes, sir.
Before you do that, we need to ask for an amendment to the agenda and add a new business item. There's not a new business item included on the agenda.
All right, sir. Commissioners, we have before us a motion to make an amendment to the agenda, and that is in the form of, I move the Planning Commission and initiate the following amendments to the zoning ordinance. Item 1 is Article 2 definitions. To consider adding new definitions related to private schools, training facilities, or instructional facilities, and or amending the current definition of private schools. And Article 2, or Item 2 would be Article 4, Rural Preservation, Sections 2, Permitted Uses, and Section 5, excuse me, and Section 5, Special Exception Uses with Board of Supervisors approval for potential inclusion of private schools or any newly defined uses related to private schools, training, or instructional facilities in accordance with the public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practices. So if we could add that to the agenda without objection.
Will we be getting some paperwork on that?
Yes, I believe Mr. Hughes is going to be working on this fuller, but we need to add it to the agenda.
Yeah,
to
we're just simply
keep it-
asking that the planning commission initiate the potential ordinance amendments. We're going to prepare the amendments and then bring those back to you at a future date. So
Okay,
this would just be to initiate that process.
okay.
All right, Mr. Hughes, do we need to add that as item 2 under any and all matters, or new business?
I would ask that you add it as maybe item 3 or item 2, new business, and make any and all item 3.
All right, sir. And then adjournment would be item 4.
Correct.
All right, sir. All right, sir. We have text amendment 04-2024. Mr. Brad Robinson, zoning administrator, presenting.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. As was just mentioned, this is a text amendment to the zoning ordinance, text amendment 04-2024. This has come before you before, so just to remind you or refresh your memory, you held a public hearing on this text amendment on July the 25th. The purpose of this text amendment is to increase the minimum size of a parking space and travelways for the purpose of addressing the issue of overhang in parking areas, which affects emergency vehicles or fire and rescue vehicles being able to maneuver through parking areas. The text amendment that you heard back in July proposed a basic change to increase the size of parking from 9x18 to 9x20, and then to increase the minimum width of travelways in all developments to 26 feet. At the Board of Supervisors meeting on September the 10th, there was some public comment that was received that expressed concerns about the impacts of this text amendment on development costs and increased impervious area. Staff was requested in response to that public comment to address or look into the concerns. In response to that, staff has prepared a revised text amendment that proposes parking and travelway dimensions that vary according to the angle of the parking space. And if you see in your packet, you should see a text amendment now that contains 2 tables. This was not in the previous text amendment that you saw back in July. The 2 tables basically just separate provisions or dimensions and requirements for parallel parking, and then the same for parking for standard vehicles. And both tables also address whether traffic is one-way or two-way. This text amendment with these tables that you see was presented to the Board of Supervisors on November the 14th. At that meeting, the board did provide their consent to move forward with this text amendment for public hearings. And as the staff report notes, because of the revisions that have been made to this text amendment, that is why this is coming before you again tonight for another public hearing. It requires another public hearing with the Planning Commission and the board. And before you open the public hearing, I just want to mention that staff would like to note some changes we would like to make to some of the dimensions that you see in the table. We've had some additional discussion with fire and rescue staff, with the fire chief. And if you look at the first table, in the last column that is labeled aisle width, both of the first 2 rows would be changed to 18 feet. Fire chief has indicated that the fire code requires a minimum of 18 feet. So we would just prefer to revise the amendment to comply with the fire code. So 18 feet in those two locations, and then in the second table for the standard vehicle parking. If you look in the fourth column that is labeled one-way aisle width, the same would be done for those first two rows. Those dimensions would change to 18 feet. And that basically concludes staff's presentation. I can attempt to address questions you might have at this time.
Yes, sir. Just for my edification to make sure I'm on the same page, in section A, the parallel parking, you are changing which column to 18 feet?
The aisle width, which is the third column.
Yes, sir.
So those numbers that read 12 and 15
Yes, sir.
would change to 18
Okay.
as recommended by fire chief.
All right, sir. And in section B, the one-way aisle width,
Yes, so the dimensions you see there labeled as 15 and a half and 17, both of those would also change to 18 feet.
okay, very good. And the reason being is, especially for fire equipment, especially if you have a ladder truck come in or another piece of heavy equipment, they require stabilizers to be extended to stabilize the unit.
That is correct.
I've got a fire background. I've been a fireman, and I've been up on an aerial truck myself, and it's scary enough up there with all the gear on, but without stabilizers, your center balance can get off hand. But this is a public safety thing, so that's the whole purpose for it. I did note the letters that were sent to the board from Tricord and Fredericksburg Area Builders Association at the time, essentially asking us to delay action on this. I don't really know why, unless it's a monetary concern that they have in the reduction of either parking spaces or whatever. And I found it a bit odd that they included that it would increase the impervious pavement when if the coin were flipped, they would be trying to use that to their advantage. So it's just my thoughts on it, but yeah, I see nothing wrong with going forward with what we have now. If any of the other commissioners have any questions, the floor is open. Commissioners, any questions at this time? Or
Yeah, I agree with, I see the letters that came in, and I certainly respect the fact that it's going to add a lot of additional costs to development and things of that nature, but it's certainly a public safety, and I come from that public safety background as well. I read this and I noticed they were talking about vehicles backing into a space, and you would have plenty of space in the front. That is true. However, I have a hitch on the back of my truck. When I back into a space, now I've encroached upon ADA, handicap, anybody, even regular individuals walking by on a sidewalk. So I have to be very mindful of backing in, because that hitch will catch your leg or anything else that's going by. So to increase the spaces longer, from a public safety perspective, I certainly would agree to that, or I would be more inclined and in favor to that. I'd like to hear other discussion as well. But thank y'all for the information that you provided.
I wasn't here in July, but so this is for all new developments that's going to come. So the guy that has the question that sent the pictures from Pendleton, how's that going to impact him if he hasn't already started his project? How that, and what benefit? I know you guys that y'all took it back after you had some discussion, or people out of the community had some questions. So what did they benefit from knocking those dimensions back from like 20 to 18? I guess is my other question.
So I believe the renderings that you see in the packet are site plans that have already been approved. I don't believe this amendment is going to affect those site plans that you saw. I believe they provided that just as an example of how this text amendment could affect future submissions.
And my other question, so the changing from 20 to 18, so what did that give the the builders? I mean, what benefit did that give them any benefit changing that?
So the current ordinance requires 9 by 18. We're proposing to increase the minimum size space for standard vehicles to 9 by 20. And there is a provision for them to reduce that if it's overhanging an area that's not a required sidewalk or landscape area. In that scenario, they'd be allowed to still utilize a 9 by 18 space, but otherwise 9 by 20 would be required.
Okay. And I was reading the letters also. So the initial letter from September the 10th, I think they asked for us to delay for a month, and then Tri-Court sent another letter on October the 7th. So it looks like it's the same group of people that are questioning us. So I mean, I guess I'm assuming we gave them a month from the initial letter from September the 10th. So I don't see a problem.
So that correspondence was received for the prior amendment that was discussed back in September with the board.
Okay.
But as of tonight's hearing, staff has not received any correspondence or public comment on this amendment that you have before you tonight. And if I can, just want to note one additional point from staff. The county does have an intention at some point in the future to do an update of the zoning ordinance, which would include our parking requirements. And from our perspective, the parking requirements are outdated because there are some situations where the parking requires too much parking. So we believe that an update of the ordinance would counteract the requirement of increase in pervious area at some point.
Commissioners, anyone else?
Yeah, Brad, are there any other jurisdictions that have increased the size of their parking spaces that you're aware of?
We've researched other jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions require more. It just varies from locality to.
So we're not first,
Correct.
and we won't be last.
And you never know, in another 10 years, we might be back revising these again when we find that they are no longer suitable, but that's future. So let's try to prepare for what future we do have.
So I have one. So if let's say at the parking center down the street or in Bowling Green, let's say if someone else purchased that and tore the buildings down to put, let's say, a Walmart there, but left the existing parking spots. So let's say they tore everything up except for the parking spots, but built new buildings. Would they have to redo the parking lot?
I want to say redevelopment would have to comply with the new regulations. Existing parking areas would not.
Yeah, based on my experience with that, if the existing structure goes away as well as the foundation, then that lose all zoning rights. So all new zoning rights would have to be put in place, or a new ordinance or compliance would have to be in place. So that parking would no longer be sufficient. So it would be upgraded to whatever the current code would be.
A new structure would have to be in compliance with current and updated building codes,
Yes,
and that would include parking
Parking.
as well.
correct.
Okay, any further questions right now?
I'm good.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. We'll open the public hearing, and if you have any follow-up comments, we'll take him up at that point.
All right, thank you.
All right, we're gonna open the public hearing on this text amendment. Is there anyone wishing to speak regarding text amendment 04-2024? Anyone wishing to speak regarding this matter? Final call, anyone wishing to speak regarding this text amendment? Seeing no one coming forward, the public hearing is now closed. Commissioners, if there are no further questions of Mr. Robinson, is there any discussion regarding this motion or this amendment? There being no discussion, we don't want to look like, as we have been publicly labeled, like a bunch of buffoons again. So let's make sure that we are in line. And if there is a motion, we will proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion, sorry. Whereas the public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practices warrants the approval of text 04-2024, I recommend that text 04-2024 be forwarded to the Board of Supervisors' recommended approval.
I can second that.
Motion by Mr. Young, seconded by Mr. Williams. Is there any further discussion? There being no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. This motion or this amendment will be forwarded to the Board of Supervisors with a recommendation of approval. All right, Mr. Hughes, do you have anything further that you would like to present on the following amendment to the zoning ordinance?
No, sir. Just wanted to say, give a little background. So we're bringing this forward because the way our ordinance is currently structured, private schools are only allowed in our R districts, R1, R2, and R3, and not in our RP district, which is 94% of the county, and all of our public schools are currently in the RP district. And so we've had a number of instances recently where people have inquired about private schools. And so, feel like this is an amendment that would just bring private schools into the same enabling situation as public schools. One of the things that we are considering as a part of this is whether or not to make them a by right use or a use by special exception. And so in some jurisdictions they are by right, and in some jurisdictions it requires special exception. And so that's one of the things that we will be investigating. The other part of this is the reason we crafted the initiation motion as we did to include potential for new definitions is because what we don't want to do is create a situation of unintended consequences where we create an enablement for a private school, but don't have it clearly defined what that does not include. And so the way our current ordinance definition is structured, it's a pretty broad definition of private school. And so if we were just to plop it into the by right RP district, there could potentially be some unintended consequences there. So that's why we want to take some time to massage that new language and potentially new definitions so that we don't end up in situations where we have a potential use that we don't necessarily want in the county. So.
Okay. Mr. Hughes, for my edification, could you clarify R1, R2, and R3?
So those are our more densely populated residential districts, and there's very little of that property zoned in the county right now. So.
And you say currently all private schools are in that particular?
No, that's the only place that the ordinance allows private schools.
Gotcha.
currently, one private school I can think of for sure is in the RP district.
Would that be considered like homeschools, and like we have quite a few of those in the area?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we want to consider and how to craft the language. Because one thing I can tell you is we don't want to police his homeschools. We don't want to have any. We don't want to try to police those because that would be an enforcement nightmare. And so that's part of looking and doing our research to bring something back to you all, because there are a number of homeschools in the county, and like I said, they typically don't have any impact on their neighbors in that kind of scenario, but they could. And so part of this is to consider, okay, at what point do they hit a tipping point where they need some additional mitigation to protect their neighbors.
Okay, that leads me to another question. How do we, I don't want to say enforce, but how do we identify a homeschool and a private school? If I had a homeschool, does that mean that only my kids can be at it? Can I have your kids come to my home? How does that work?
Well, they range. I mean, there's sometimes consortiums of families that get together, and you might have one family that teaches mathematics. You might have one family that teaches another subject, and so those individuals may travel from house to house, but typically those are small and have limited impact. What we wouldn't want to have happen is a scenario where that began to grow and grow and grow, and it became an issue. And typically in that scenario, the neighbors would say, "Hey, all of a sudden at 7:30 in the morning, I have a new stream of cars coming in and out of on my street or at my driveway or something," and then we would have to address it at that point. Right now, it's a little difficult to do that, and the way our current ordinance is set up, if they're in the RP district, then they wouldn't be an allowed use, and there's no provision for them to be there, so they couldn't even come to you and ask for a special exception. Or if a church wanted to start a school today, and everything, they had facilities, they had parking, everything was perfect. If they bought an old public school and wanted to run it, and it was in the RP district, there's no provision in them to even come to the county and say, "Hey, I'd like to have this as a private school." Absent of rezoning it to R2, R1, or R3, and then that creates a situation where we have inappropriate zoning in a particular area.
Okay, yeah.
And to answer part of Mr. Young's question, the difference between a homeschool and a private school is private school is going to expect, something, you're going to have to pay something
Compensation.
or some type of compensation, whereas homeschool is just something that a family does, if they fall under the Virginia code and they're, eligible to do that.
Okay. I guess I was leading into the fact of I wanted to know how do we,
Yeah.
I want to say control or enforce, those are too harsh
Yeah.
words, but how do we work with the homeschools and not letting them grow into
Yeah.
that arena?
Well,
that
they have to
lose
apply for a business license, if a group of homeschoolers get together and there is compensation involved, then they have to apply for a business license.
Yeah.
But generally, most homeschools are just,
Yeah.
one or two, or maybe up to 5 families get together maybe once a week.
And that's okay. I'm not against that.
Yeah, that's a
I'm
Virginia
just saying,
code
yeah.
thing.
But how do we protect ourselves as a county, letting a homeschool grow into 25, 30 kids being in a facility?
Yeah, and then they're probably going to want some compensation, so they've got to apply in that case for a business license, because we have some of those in the county, I know, and the ones I know have applied for business license. But yeah, we probably need to take a look at that ordinance.
But I'm saying, but how? Yeah, I was going to say that. But how do we control where that goes? Where those particular homeschools, would you allow it in your neighborhood, or should that go into a specific district?
Wherever, right now, wherever private businesses are allowed, I assume, is where they function.
Probably very similar to a daycare.
In some ways, I guess.
Some ways, homeschools are a lot less impactful than any type of daycare. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, I agree with
Yeah,
you.
they're just that's why I said from an enforcement perspective, it would create an enforcement challenge for staff to try to police homeschools until they got to a point where they started to generate traffic and that kind of stuff. So, typically, what we would see is some institution, a church, decides, hey, they had a daycare, and the families in that daycare have requested that, hey, our kids are transitioning to the kindergarten levels. Can we extend their time here into kindergarten? And then they have a group of kids, and that goes to first grade, and then second grade. And then all of a sudden, they look up and they say, wow, well, now we have kids from kindergarten through fifth grade, so we might want to have a full-fledged school. And then they may say, well, okay, well, we've got fifth grade, let's look at sixth grade and seventh grade. And that's typically how these sometimes private schools grow up out of churches. Well, right now, there's no provision in our ordinance at all that would benefit a situation like that.
So all you need from us really is, I guess, authority to.
It's just initiation to look at the amendments. And like I said, that's why it's so broad, because it may include new definitions for not only home schools, private schools, but also training facilities. I can think of an instance in a neighboring jurisdiction where the private school definition became problematic because of there are certain training facilities that do certain things that could technically be defined as a school, and as a private school, depending on how the definition is crafted. So that's why we want to take some time to craft some appropriate definitions to cover those things, so we don't end up with an unintended consequence of a use that could be obnoxious or have a negative impact on a community.
All right, so all you need is a motion and an approval from us, or
Just a motion and an initiation, that's it. And then we will come back with our research and our recommendations for amendments to the ordinance.
all right.
How do you want that worded? You want it worded under any,
Well,
or just say, we so move?
well, Mr. Schwartz there, Chairman Schwartz has a motion in front of him.
Copy?
And that is, I move the planning commission initiate the following amendments to the zoning ordinance. Item 1, Article 2, definitions, to consider adding new definitions related to private schools, training facilities, or instructional facilities, and or amending the current definition of private schools. And Section 2, Article 4, rural preservation, Sections 2, permitted uses under, and Section 5, special exception uses, with Board of Supervisors approval for potential inclusion of private schools or any newly defined uses related to private schools, training, or instructional facilities in accordance with the public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practices. So this would be a motion.
I'll second.
All right. Motion by the chair, seconded by Dr. Horton and Vice Chair Young. Excuse me, I have a persistent cough. Any further discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. So moved. All right. Thank you very much. Any and all matters?
No, sir. Staff would just like to wish all the Plan Commission members a happy holiday season, and we will see you all in 2025.
See you next year.
Thank you, sir.
See you next year.
All right, there's a motion to adjourn to the January 23rd, 2025 regular meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Motion carries. This last meeting of 2024 is hereby adjourned. Thank you, one and all, and a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Same.